Okay, so we're diving into something today that's always in the news, but never really explored in depth.
Hmm.
Islamic fundamentalism.
Yeah.
You hear it all the time, but I don't think a lot of people know what it really means,
Right.
beyond the sound bites and all the political rhetoric.
Yeah.
So today we're going to unpack this whole phenomenon,
Okay.
go beyond the surface, and really try to understand its roots, its evolution,
Yeah.
and the challenges that it brings up,
Right.
both for Muslim communities and globally.
Yeah. It's interesting how loaded
This is a deep dive.
that term Islamic fundamentalism has become.
Mm-hmm.
It's often used as this like catch-all phrase for anything that is perceived as extreme or threatening in the Muslim world.
Mm-hmm.
But to really grasp it, we have to understand that at its core,
Okay.
it's about this yearning for what is seen as the pure form of Islam.
So it's not necessarily about violence or extremism.
No.
It's more about this idea of going back to a perceived golden age of the faith.
Precisely. And this impulse to like purify
Right.
the faith in society.
Yeah.
It's not unique to Islam.
Okay.
We see very similar movements in other religions throughout history.
Okay.
If you think about the Puritans in Christianity, for example. But in the context of Islam, it's really important to understand that these movements have always arisen in response to what are seen as threats
Okay.
to traditional values and way of life.
So if we're going to trace the roots of Islamic fundamentalism, we need to look at the historical context.
Absolutely. Throughout Islamic history,
Okay.
whenever there's been a sense that Muslim societies
Yeah.
are straying from the true path of Islam, or when external forces are seen as encroaching upon their world,
Yeah.
fundamentalist movements have emerged.
So it's almost like a pendulum swing.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Okay.
When things feel out of balance,
Yeah.
there's a push to reassert what's perceived as the core of the faith and restore a sense of order.
But this desire for a return can manifest in many different ways, right?
Exactly.
It's not a monolithic movement.
Yeah, and that's where the historical evolution
Okay.
becomes so important. Over the past century, we've seen Islamic fundamentalism really morph
Okay.
from a primarily inward-focused movement concerned with reforming individual behavior and societal norms to a much more politically charged force,
Okay.
seeking to actually reshape entire systems of governance.
Wow. So how did that shift happen?
Well,
What were the catalysts for that evolution?
a lot of it can be traced to the decline of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
That was a seismic event for the Muslim world.
Yeah.
It led to a sense of dispossession and a search for new sources of identity and authority.
So in the void left by the collapse of this once mighty empire,
Right.
new ideologies and movements arose,
Exactly.
each vying for influence
Yeah.
and offering different visions for the future of the Muslim world.
Precisely. And amidst all that turbulence,
Okay.
Islamic fundamentalism gained traction, appealing to those who longed for a return to a perceived past glory
Okay.
and a sense of stability anchored in religious principles.
But as this movement gained momentum,
Yeah,
it also splintered, right?
it did.
Giving rise to different strands, some advocating for peaceful reform,
Yeah.
while others embraced more radical and confrontational approaches.
Yes.
And that's where things get really complicated because
Yeah.
when we talk about Islamic fundamentalism today,
Right.
we often hear the term jihadism
Mm-hmm.
used almost interchangeably.
Yeah.
But you've stressed the importance of making a distinction.
It's absolutely crucial.
Okay.
Jihadism is a very specific subset of Islamic fundamentalism,
Okay.
referring to those groups that believe that violence is a legitimate tool to achieve their political and religious goals.
So it's about drawing a line
Yes.
between those who seek change through peaceful means, even if they advocate for a stricter interpretation of Islamic law,
Yeah,
and those who resort to violence to advance their cause.
exactly.
Okay.
And understanding that distinction is crucial
Yeah.
if we want to have meaningful conversations about this topic.
Right.
It's not about labeling all Islamic fundamentalists as extremists, but recognizing the spectrum of views
Right.
within this very broad movement.
Yeah.
And to delve deeper into that,
Yeah.
we need to look at what binds these jihadist groups together.
Okay.
What are their defining characteristics, and what drives individuals to join their ranks?
Okay. Let's get into that.
When you look at jihadist groups, you start to notice these
Okay.
recurring themes.
Mm-hmm.
One is this narrative of victimhood,
Okay.
this belief that Islam and Muslims are under constant attack
Yeah.
from outside forces,
Right.
whether it's the West
Right.
or secular governments
Okay.
or other perceived enemies.
Yeah, it's like a siege mentality.
Right.
This feeling of being surrounded and threatened,
Exactly.
which then justifies a defensive or
Yeah.
even offensive posture.
And this ties into another common characteristic, the
Yeah.
idea of a pure Islam,
Mm-mm.
this pristine version of the faith
Yeah.
that has been corrupted by outside influences.
Right.
Jihadist groups see themselves as restoring this pure Islam,
Okay.
often through the establishment of a caliphate,
Right.
a state governed by their interpretation of Islamic law.
So the caliphate isn't just about territory.
No.
It's about establishing a model society.
Yes.
A beacon of true Islam
Right.
as they see it.
Exactly.
But how does this translate to
Yeah.
real-world action?
It varies.
Okay.
Take Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, in Syria.
Go.
They evolved from al-Qaeda,
Yeah.
but in recent years have tried to rebrand,
Okay.
distancing themselves from global jihadism
Okay.
and focusing on local control and governance.
Interesting.
They've toned down the anti-Western rhetoric
Mhm.
and even fought against ISIS.
So it's almost like a strategic repositioning.
It seems that way,
Oh.
recognizing that aligning too closely with global jihad makes them a target.
Makes them a target, right?
Yeah, they've provided services,
Okay.
enforced their version of law and order,
Mm-hmm.
and even engaged in what some might call nation-building activities.
But is this genuine ideological evolution or just a tactic
Good question.
for survival in a complex conflict? The
Yeah.
source material mentioned these internal clashes
Right.
within HTS,
Yeah.
suggesting not everyone's on board
Mm-hmm.
with this more moderate approach.
You're right. There are signs of friction between hardliners and those pushing for a more pragmatic path.
Yeah, it raises a crucial question for policymakers then.
It does.
Can groups like HTS be partners in stabilizing Syria,
Right.
or is this just a temporary facade?
Yeah. And this dilemma
Yeah,
isn't confined to the Middle East.
right. We're seeing the Islamic State brand,
Yeah.
despite its losses in Iraq and Syria,
Yeah.
popping up in some unexpected places.
Right.
The source material highlighted Trinidad and Tobago as an example,
Yeah. How is ISIS?
right? How is ISIS managing to spread its influence?
The internet
Yeah.
has been a game changer for extremist groups.
Okay.
It allows them to bypass traditional media
Yeah.
and connect directly with potential recruits globally.
Right.
ISIS in particular has been masterful
Mm-hmm.
at using professionally produced videos,
Oh, yeah.
online magazines,
Okay.
and social media to spread its message, attract followers.
It's almost like a reverse form of marketing,
Yeah.
targeting vulnerable individuals,
Right.
particularly young people,
Mm-hmm.
with promises of belonging,
Right.
purpose, adventure.
And it plays into the anxieties and grievances
Yeah.
that many people already feel,
Yeah.
whether it's economic hardship,
Okay.
political disenfranchisement,
Hmm.
or simply a search for identity.
And this is where the debate between scholars like Olivier Roy
Yeah.
and Gilles Keppel gets interesting.
Mhm.
They offer such different perspectives
Right.
on what drives people towards jihadism.
Yeah.
Roy emphasizes social and cultural factors,
Mhm.
arguing that many recruits are driven by alienation
Right.
and a yearning for belonging,
Yeah.
while Keppel focuses more on the role of ideology
Hmm.
and religious indoctrination.
It's probably a combination of both. And
Yeah.
that complexity
Right.
is precisely what makes this issue so difficult to tackle.
Because it's not just about security crackdowns.
No.
It's about addressing the underlying social and economic conditions
Right.
that make extremist narratives so appealing.
Yeah. And this is where the internet
Yeah,
becomes a double-edged sword.
Okay.
While it's been exploited by extremist groups.
right.
It can also be a powerful tool
Yeah.
for counter-messaging.
So fighting fire with fire,
Yeah.
using the same online platforms
Exactly.
and techniques to reach vulnerable audiences,
Yeah.
but with a message of peace and tolerance.
Governments and civil society organizations are
Okay.
increasingly engaging in online counterterrorism efforts,
Okay.
trying to debunk extremist propaganda
Yeah.
and promote alternative narratives.
We see this with initiatives like the French government's Stop Jihadism website,
Mm-hmm.
which aims to provide accurate information about Islam
Yeah.
and counter the distorted interpretations spread by extremist groups.
But are these efforts actually effective?
Right.
Can you really change someone's mind online?
Yeah, is it possible?
It's hard to measure the impact definitively,
All right.
but it's crucial to be present in those online spaces,
Right.
offering alternative viewpoints, engaging in dialogue. It's not about silencing extremist voices,
Right.
but providing a counterbalance, a space for critical thinking and nuanced perspective.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about stopping violence.
Yeah.
It's about winning hearts and minds.
Yeah.
But what about those who've already gone down the path of radicalization?
Yeah.
Is there any way back for them? Is de-radicalization even possible? It feels like we've been exploring a maze with twists and turns at every corner, but now we're at a particularly difficult juncture.
Yeah.
What happens when someone's already deeply entrenched in this extremist ideology?
Right.
I mean, is there any hope of turning them away from that path?
It's one of the toughest challenges in countering terrorism.
Okay.
But there is a growing field of research and practice
Right.
focused on de-radicalization and disengagement.
Okay. So it's possible.
It's not about magically erasing someone's beliefs.
Right.
It's more about helping them find a different way to see the world and themselves.
But what does that look like?
Well,
Is there a one-size-fits-all approach?
not at all.
Okay.
It's highly individualized,
Okay.
often involving a combination of psychological counseling, theological dialogue.
Social reintegration.
So it's really about addressing the underlying motivations and traumas that led them to extremism in the first place.
Challenging those distorted interpretations of faith that they've embraced
Right.
and helping them build new lives.
Yeah.
Rooted in more positive values.
I imagine it's a really delicate process.
It is.
Trying to unravel years of indoctrination and resentment.
You're right. It requires patience, empathy, and a deep understanding of the individual's journey.
Okay.
Sometimes it involves working with families and communities to rebuild trust
Yeah.
and create a more supportive environment for change.
It sounds like there's no quick fix.
No.
How do you even measure success?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
There's no foolproof method.
Okay.
Some individuals genuinely transform, while others may be more adept at playing the system.
Okay.
Recidivism rates vary.
Yeah.
It's hard to assess the long-term impact. So it's a constant process of evaluation and adapting strategies and recognizing that there will be setbacks along the way.
Absolutely. But even with those challenges, these programs are essential.
Okay.
They offer a glimmer of hope, both for those seeking to escape extremism and for society as a whole.
Yeah.
They demonstrate that there are alternatives to violence and hatred,
Right.
even for those who've gone down a very dark path.
I think that's a powerful message to end on. This deep dive into Islamic fundamentalism has been at times unsettling.
Right.
We've confronted uncomfortable truths,
We have.
grappled with really complex dilemmas, and acknowledged that the threat of violence is very real and enduring.
Yeah. But we've also seen
But we've also seen glimmers of hope.
glimmers of hope.
Individuals and communities working to counter these extremist narratives.
Yeah.
Governments and organizations investing in de-radicalization efforts and a growing recognition that this is a battle that can only be won
Right.
through a multifaceted long-term approach.
It's a battle worth fighting.
It is, because ultimately it's about upholding those values of peace, tolerance, understanding, not just within the Muslim world, but in our global community.
That's so.
So as we conclude this deep dive,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with this thought. How can each of us contribute to building a world where dialogue replaces division
Right.
and where empathy and critical thinking serve as bulwarks against extremism?
It is.
It's a question worth pondering because the answers lie not in simplistic solutions, but in our collective commitment to fostering a more just, equitable, and peaceful world.